How's it going, everybody? Too Spooky here. In this video today, we're going to be counting down the top 10 Kekkei Genkai in Naruto. I've been wanting to make a top 10 on Naruto for literal years now, but for some reason, I just never got around to it. So with 2018 quickly coming to a close, I figured it was about time we make this happen already. As always, before we get started, there's a few things you need to keep in mind when going into this top 10. Firstly, my pronunciation is garbage, so you can expect some of that throughout the video. Secondly, in these top 10s, I usually like to provide in-depth explanations on the abilities I'm discussing before I explain my personal opinion on their placement. However, in the past, I made an entire 50-minute video going over and explaining every Kekkei Genkai. So instead of repeating what I've already talked about, I am highly recommending you guys go check out that video before watching this one. There will be a card in the top right-hand corner of the screen or a link in the description. I mainly suggest you guys go check out that video first so you guys are up to date on the information, as this time around I'm just starting right out of the gate with my opinion, and maybe only referencing a few things to solidify those points. But if you feel like you already have a good grasp on the information, well, feel free to carry on. Thirdly, like any top 10, this is based on my own personal opinion. However, I will be trying my best to back up all these opinions with facts. And finally, I will only be covering the Kekkei Genkai featured in the Naruto manga, which means no Boruto and no filler. I also will not be covering Kekkei Mora or Kekkei Tota, so things like Particle Release and the Rena Sharingan will not be included in this video. Anyway, now that you know what to expect and what not to expect, let's officially jump into the list. First, let's begin with an honorable mention, which is the Mangekyo Sharingan. To clarify, I'm considering the Sharingan and Mangekyo Sharingan two different things. So, spoiler alert, we'll talk about the regular Sharingan later on. In general, the Sharingan is a very overpowered Kekkei Genkai, which I can assure you, we will explain why it's so overpowered later. But when it comes to the Mangekyo Sharingan, it just doesn't quite make the cut for two reasons. Firstly, you'd think that because the Mangekyo Sharingan can do everything that the regular Sharingan can, that it would be equal, if not better. But then you also slap on the fact that having the Mangekyo Sharingan also gives you two additional OP abilities unique to the individual. And if you have not one, but two functioning eyes, you're also granted the Chakra Mech Susanoo as well. I mean, if you're in Uchiha right now, you're probably thinking, whose dong do I have to suck to get my hands on these bad boys? Am I right? Well, not so fast there, Mr. Uchiha. Here's the kicker. To get your grubby hands on these eyes, you first need to witness the death of someone extremely close to you, which right off the bat is basically signing yourself up for a lifetime in therapy. However, to be fair, a lot of the Uchiha are cold-hearted motherfuckers, so a lot of them literally murdered their closest friends to achieve these legendary eyes. To actually murder your own best friend for power, these eyes have to be pretty darn good, right? So why are they only an honorable mention? The main reason, in my opinion, to why these eyes don't quite make the cut, is because using the new Mangekyo abilities causes you to go blind. So yeah, you can shoot inextinguishable black flames out of your eyes. Big whoop! Now you're blind, nerd! Obviously, you can only actually become blind with prolonged or overuse of these abilities, but in general, from what we've seen, this blindness actually occurs relatively quickly. As Itachi was basically blind already, Sasuke was on his way there at an incredible rate, and Kakashi only used Kamui like, 5 times, and was basically already pulling out the walking stick. The only way around this that we know of is with the elusive, plot hole fixing, Senju DNA, which is hacks! Because this DNA essentially heals your body constantly and at an incredible rate. So if you're like Obito, and just happen to have both the Mangekyo Sharingan and Senju DNA, you can just sit there spamming Kamui like it's nothing, and never go blind. Which is stupid broken! But because having these two things together is extremely rare, it's pretty likely you're just going to end up blind and hopeless if you intend to use the Mangekyo Sharingan for its intended purpose. So the bottom line for this one, I just can't put it on the list, because although it grants some pretty broken abilities, if you use them, you're just going to end up blind, which is a massive handicap. Not to mention the extreme chakra cost it takes to use the abilities as well. And on top of that, there's just too many requirements to actually achieve these eyes in the first place. So although I do acknowledge them as a very superior ability, the drawbacks are far too severe to place them on the list. So instead, they will remain as an honorable mention. Number 10. Shikotsu Miyaku. With the start of our list, we have the Kekkei Genkai that was only demonstrated naturally by Kimimaro, and involves a ton of bones. Personally, I feel like this is one of the most underrated abilities in Naruto, period. And I feel like there's a good chance we didn't get to see the full extent of what it could do. Basically, any sort of close combat with this Kekkei Genkai is going to be nearly impossible to deal with. Not only is it hard to land hits due to the bone spikes protruding out of the individual's body as both a shield and a weapon, but in addition to that, because this Kekkei Genkai specializes in close range combat, you also have to deal with all sorts of straight up bone weapons, like swords, spikes, whips, and even lances. So unless you can somehow cut or break through literal bone, you're gonna have a bad time.
You're gonna have a bad time.
On top of that, Kimimaro himself also mentioned how his bones can be as strong as steel. So you're basically going up against someone who can produce long metal spikes and long metal weapons out of any location on their body at any time. To just give one example of how effective it is in close combat, during Kimimaro's fight against Naruto, Naruto created at least more than 100 shadow clones, and not a single one of them was able to lay a single scratch on him. So now that we've established that in close quarters or hand-to-hand combat, this ability is already one of the more superior. However, because of that, you'd think it's really only useful in close combat situations. And while that is certainly where it exceeds, it can still do just as much damage from a decent distance away, as this ability also allows the user to shoot bone bullets out of their fingertips, which although Gaara was able to block them with his sand defense, they still had enough speed and force to almost reach Gaara himself. So although they probably don't have the same power as a regular bullet, they are certainly fast enough to kill the average ninja. With that in mind, I would also predict he's likely able to use other types of bone from his body as projectiles, but since we haven't seen it, I suppose it's just an idea. In addition to all of that, Kimimaro was also able to create essentially a bone exoskeleton directly below the skin that covered his entire body, giving him an even greater defense against basically any attacks, including being able to absolutely tank Gaara's sand burials without any noticeable damage to his internal structure. Which, considering we've seen that sand burial can literally crush an entire person into goop, the fact that this bone can withstand that pressure is very impressive. The final thing I wanted to touch upon is the fact that this Kekkei Genkai is not exclusively centered around taijutsu, because if all else fails, it can somehow use a technique that spawns bones out of the ground in every direction, that will skewer anyone who is unfortunate enough to be on the ground when the bones start rising. And Kimimaro himself can also merge with these bones for surprise attacks if anyone were to actually survive. With that knowledge, I'd be willing to bet that Kimimaro also had some other ninjutsu abilities that we just never got to see, so this Kekkei Genkai could be even more powerful than I already think. But instead of rambling on and on about what else this Kekkei Genkai could possibly do, let's instead just take it at face value, which is already enough in my opinion to consider it one of the best. It's also unfortunate that Kimimaro himself was extremely sick, because if he wasn't, I'd be willing to bet that he could have killed both Gaara and Lee without going through as much trouble as he did, especially since he had them on the ropes when he finally keeled over. But even though I would consider this Kekkei Genkai one of the best, it is unfortunately no match against the Kekkei Genkai we're about to discuss, leaving it as the worst of the best at number 10. Number 9. Jugo's unnamed Kekkei Genkai. This is another underrated Kekkei Genkai, as it has numerous useful and powerful abilities with only a few drawbacks or weaknesses. The Kekkei Genkai itself allows the user to subconsciously and constantly take in natural energy, which then allows the user to apply this natural energy to various techniques, including Sage Mode itself. which when Jugo is in Sage mode, it basically buffs the individual exponentially in terms of raw power, durability, and speed, or essentially just enhancing almost every physical feature you could possibly imagine. Jugo can then use his Sage body to create various weapons, create literal blasters that can be used to blast straight up concentrated chakra at enemies, or also use those blasters as a propulsion system, and also create things like shields for defense. The offensive capabilities speak for themselves based on what we've seen with the curse marks in the past, as they were created by Orochimaru based on Jugo's own Kekkei Genkai. But when it comes to defense, because Jugo is much more durable in Sage mode and can also create shields and such, he was even able to take a point-blank punch from the 4th Raikage on multiple occasions, and still not only survive, but have enough strength to counterattack. For comparison, the 4th Raikage was also able to break right through the Susanoo's ultimate defense, only with his fists, so his punches are pretty next level. So already in terms of offense and defense, this Kekkei Genkai is doing pretty well for itself. But even so, you might still be wondering if that's really enough for it to be put on the list. Well, normally you'd be right. But this ability also allows Jugo to use other people's bodies to restore himself. He does this by sucking up their chakra and flesh with a tube he creates from his own body, which will heal all of his wounds and return him to his regular state. And if someone is compatible with curse marks, he's also able to transfer his own flesh to them to heal their wounds and also make himself appear younger. So Jugo can take a real beating and still come back like nothing happened. Basically, my reason for putting it on this list is because it's a very well-rounded Kekkei Genkai that I feel people don't give enough credit to. It's got great offensive and defensive capabilities with the addition of self-restoration through others' flesh, which is pretty metal. It also led to the introduction of curse marks, which as we knew gave a significant strength boost to quite a few different people. I, however, just wish we were able to see a little bit more of what Jugo could actually do, and the only downfall with this Kekkei Genkai is the fact that it makes the individual mentally insane for random periods of time. So it can cause the individual to go on literal murderous rampages that you can never predict when it will end, making it really hard to be around loved ones or comrades of any kind. So because of that weakness, I cannot place it any higher than number 9. Number 8. Scorch Release. Because this particular Kekkei Genkai was only demonstrated for a short time by Pakura and Pakura alone, we'll just get straight to the point. I believe this Kekkei Genkai is one of the best simply because it kills everyone it touches, at least from what we've seen. Pakura has only demonstrated 2 techniques in total, one of which is technically filler since it was anime only. So although I'd still consider that technique something she can or should be able to do, because I said no filler at the beginning of the video, I'm basing this opinion specifically off the one canon jutsu. Though again, the filler technique is still something this ability could likely do, so take that as you will. But the one jutsu we have seen involves Pakura creating these multiple miniature suns that float around her body. She's then able to control these suns by making them fly at or into people or around herself however she likes. Wait a second, haven't I heard that somewhere before? Anyway, the power of these miniature suns comes from when they touch a person, as they will then suck out every bit of moisture from their body, instantly turning them into a raisin, which also results in death. We don't exactly know the range she can effectively control this ability from, but because she controls them in the air outside of her body, we can assume the distance is somewhat close range, but it could be further. But I would consider that the only downfall if they cannot go a decent range. However, in the anime alone, it was also shown that this Kekkei Genkai was weak to water, but again, since that's filler, I'm not going to count that here. So bottom line with this one, this Kekkei Genkai is basically a one-hit kill for basically everyone. If that sun touches you, you dead, son. Simple enough. But because this ability is theoretically so overpowered, it just has to be put on the list. However, because we haven't seen the full extent of what it can do, and it's likely lacking in long-range techniques, I can't place it any higher on the list. Though because I believe it could even kill Kimimaro and Jugo if they were to come in contact with the miniature suns, I at least had to place it above their Kekkei Genkai. But because I don't believe it can top the Kekkei Genkai above it on the list, it will remain here at number 8.
Oh, that's hot. That's hot.
Number 7. The Byakugan. I think it's pretty common knowledge at this point that the Byakugan got absolutely shafted when compared to the other dojutsu. But even so, it's easy to forget that it's still a pretty powerful and useful ability. It just ended up not being able to compete with the other dojutsu as the series continued. Anyways, the Spark Notes version of why this belongs on the list is due to its many useful abilities, such as being able to see over 20 kilometers away, being able to analyze an opponent's movements and see chakra to an even greater extent than the Sharingan, being able to see through things like smoke that would normally blind a person, being able to see in a 360-degree radius around their body, aside from a small blind spot. But most of all, the most effective ability of the Byakugan is the Gentle Fist fighting style. Due to the fact the Byakugan user can see the chakra system and the pressure points that accompany it, they've developed a fighting style and many different techniques that involve exploiting these pressure points to deal massive and crippling damage to their opponents. The one most people are familiar with is the 8 trigrams 64 palms, which completely shuts down their opponent's chakra system with a barrage of 64 different attacks in a quick window of time. Disrupting the chakra flow completely not only stops their opponent from using jutsu, but can also do internal damage to their opponent's organs and make them unable to stand. So the Byakugan is great offensively and tactically in many different situations, which makes it a very powerful and useful ability in my opinion. The only main downfall of the Byakugan is that its Gentle Fist techniques are really only useful in close combat, and they also have that blind spot that can cause a world of problems if their opponent knows how to exploit it. Putting that weakness and downfall aside, this ability can not only be extremely effective in combat, as theoretically a competent Byakugan user could take down even the strongest of enemies by taking out their chakra system, but the user of the Byakugan would also be great at something like stealth missions due to their hyper-increased vision and increased perception. In general, the Byakugan would also theoretically be the best counter against the Sharingan, since it has a high immunity to Genjutsu, which is another reason I decided to put it above the previous Kekkei Genkai. However, due to its few downfalls and the fact that I think it wouldn't fare too well against the Kekkei Genkai to come, I have no choice but to make it our number 7. Before we move on though, the Byakugan also technically has its own Mangekyo counterpart called the Tenseigan. However, because it's only been featured in movies and novels, I don't exactly consider it canon myself, as it didn't appear in the Naruto manga. I know some of you do consider it canon, but we can agree to disagree on that. But because of my personal opinion on it, I will not be featuring it on this list. Number 6. Explosion Release. This Kekkei Genkai is one of the more heavy-hitting, as it can also be a one-hit kill just like Scorch Release, or just do an immense amount of damage or destruction with a single jutsu. The two canon users we know of are Deidara and Gari. I'd imagine Gari is the main example of what the average Explosion Release user can do, as Deidara uses a Kinjutsu to make his explosive clay figures. So at face value, Gari is able to blow people up with any contact with his fists. So like Kimimara's Kekkei Genkai, the Explosion Release is mainly only useful in close combat situations by itself. But because Deidara has demonstrated on numerous occasions how powerful this technique can be with chakra-infused clay, and therefore how effective it can be used at a long range, I have no choice but to say it deserves to be on this list, and decently high up for that matter. For instance, aside from the normal suicide-bombing clay animals, Deidara also developed the C4 and C0 techniques, which are insanely powerful jutsu. C4 sends microscopic bombs into his opponent's bloodstream, which will destroy the enemy at the cellular level, which already should be enough to give it a place on this list because that can take down basically anybody. But with C0, Deidara can also use himself as a bomb for the ultimate 10-kilometer explosion. Which, yeah, you game end yourself in the process, but anyone in a 10-kilometer or 6-mile radius is getting taken down with you. Unless you're this waste of life. But yeah, in terms of overall destructive power and variety of techniques, this Kekkei Genkai more than deserves to be on this list. But because in general it's not as useful or effective without a Kinjutsu to accompany it, it's therefore not quite as good as the Kekkei Genkai above this one, making it our number 6. Number 5. Lava Release. When it comes to Lava Release, one of the things I like about it most is that it can be used in many different unique ways that vary from user to user. Examples including Mei with her acidic mud, Son Goku with his molten rock lava, and Dodai with his rubber-like substance. So you can just make straight up lava or tweak the element to fit your own liking. This not only makes it a powerful offensive Kekkei Genkai, but also very tactical like the Byakugan, as for instance the rubber type jutsu are able to be used as a protective barrier, and also as a way to reinforce already existing barriers. So by that logic, it could also be used as a way to trap enemies if they are caught within it. Or on the offensive side of things, we have Mei who can produce that acidic mud. It should also be noted that when this was first shown in the anime, it just looked like straight up lava, but it was later revealed that it doesn't actually appear like lava in the manga, so it was changed. But this acidic mud still acts very similar to lava in the fact that it will corrode and melt almost anything, including flesh and even chakra defenses like the Susanoo. Then you also consider that Son Goku's techniques are essentially just molten lava with rocks mixed in, meaning that if you get touched by it, you're gonna get burned. Which, as an example of how deadly that can be, spoiler alert, just look at what happened to Ace! Oh wait, that's not even the right series. Son of a Anyway, I'd say that Lava Release is one of the best due to its versatility. It can be used offensively and very powerfully at that, or defensively and for support purposes. It's also not like the previous Kekkei Genkai in the fact that the offensive and defensive capabilities are extremely useful on both sides of the spectrum. So because of all that, I have no choice but to place this one in the top 5. However, for clarification, I should at least acknowledge that in my opinion, Explosion Release and Lava Release are very close in terms of how good they actually are. But the deciding factor came from the fact that the Explosion Release doesn't have any use defensively. So it's all about overwhelming offensive power, which because Lava Release can be very deadly on its own, with defensive or support-like abilities, it just barely made the cut above Explosion Release. Number 4, Wood Release. Good old Wood Release. If you guys are familiar with this one already, it really shouldn't be a surprise that it's so high up on the list, but basically, this Kekkei Genkai is insanely strong. Since there's a lot to cover with this one in particular, I'll try to condense my reasonings a bit, otherwise we're gonna be here for a while. Firstly, while its main ability at its core is to create and manipulate wood, it can do so much more than that, such as creating wood clones that are basically impossible to differentiate from the normal person. These clones can also tank a little bit of damage, unlike other clones which will disappear with just a single hit. These clones can also perform their own jutsu and whatnot, so you can whip out a bunch of different techniques at the same time. Then we have the hobby technique, which can create an insanely large wooden shield that can tank even a tailed beast bomb with virtually no damage. Then we got the wood human technique, which is basically the equivalent of a wooden mech that's as strong as a tailed beast. Then we've got a literal wood dragon that can just come in and mess people up. And that's not even scratching the surface of what this Kekkei Genkai can do with the wood. If I were to go over every technique and why it's just so powerful and useful, we'd be here for quite a while, boys. So on top of the offensive and defensive capabilities of this Kekkei Genkai, there's still a lot of extra features that make it just that much more amazing. Like for instance, the passive ability to absorb or suppress chakra when the wood comes in contact with an individual, which in turn allows the user to effectively take down and subdue even a tailed beast. Plus, if you have Wood Release, you're basically confirmed to have Senju DNA, which, like we said earlier, is complete and total hacks! No need to eat or drink, all wounds just healing on their own. Wood Release, and Senju DNA for that matter, is broken. But in terms of useful abilities, overwhelming power, and impenetrable defense, and all its supportive uses outside of combat, it's a no-brainer that this Kekkei Genkai not only knocks the previous ones out of the park, but also is very deserving of a place so high up on the list. In fact, some of you might think this one deserves to be even higher, but unfortunately there are still Kekkei Genkai that are even more broken than this one. So because of that, Wood Release is coming in at number 4. Number 3, the Sharingan. Now, after only giving the Mangekyo Sharingan an honorable mention, it's finally time to talk about its far superior counterpart, the regular Sharingan. Now, as most of you probably know, the Sharingan has essentially a metric ton of abilities, which the Mangekyo also has access to, but again, the downfalls of the Mangekyo are just absolute booty. However, when it comes to the main abilities of the regular Sharingan, it can see chakra, it's able to read movements at a very fast speed, and can therefore anticipate and react before their opponent even completes their movement. Copy any jutsu, excluding Kekkei Genkai the user does not have access to, and also has access to some of the most extreme genjutsu available. And that's just the basics. There's obviously a lot more little things that it can do as well, but these are the most important points. Basically, any individual that possesses 2 functioning Sharingan with all 3 Tomo are capable of performing each of the abilities listed above, already making it one of the best Kekkei Genkai just by those characteristics alone. Like, for instance, because it can copy any jutsu and also read and predict movements, your opponent could start a jutsu, and the Sharingan user could finish the same jutsu before their opponent even completes their own, which, depending on the jutsu they're about to do, that could be extremely detrimental. But if it already wasn't powerful and broken enough, every Sharingan user also has Izanagi and Izanami, which are basically the biggest ass pull techniques I've ever seen. Seriously, listen to these shenanigans right here. With Izanagi, the Sharingan user is legitimately able to perform a one-time illusion on reality itself. Let that sink in for a second. Izanagi allows them to perform a genjutsu on actual reality. Are you kidding me? This one technique basically allows the Sharingan user to bypass anything, because they trick reality into thinking that reality didn't actually happen, therefore making said event not actually happen. So if you get stabbed in the heart and are about to die, but then use Izanagi, you rewrite reality to a reality where you weren't stabbed in the heart. That's overpowered as hell! The only downside is that you lose your eyesight in one of your Sharingan completely, and it basically can never be used for anything again. So if you have 2 Sharingan eyes, you're able to perform this ass pull not once, but twice. Or if you're a sleazeball like Danzo, you can just spam it over and over. I know I gave the Mangekyo some flack for making you blind, but this is just obnoxious in comparison. Warping reality itself is worth the lack of eyesight in my opinion, even if the average Uchiha can only do it twice. And really, if you think about it, you can just steal someone else's Sharingan and pop it into your skull to get your eyesight back if you really needed to, in turn also allowing you to use Izanagi again. If that wasn't bad enough, we still have the other technique, Izunami, which, put simply, places someone in a constant genjutsu loop of events, where the person under the influence of the genjutsu must come to terms with whatever mistakes they've made in life. So the person could never come to terms with their mistakes and just sit there for eternity reliving the same events over and over, or they can realize their mistakes after an undisclosed amount of time and break out of the illusion. This technique also costs the Sharingan user their eyesight in the eye that they activated the ability. So theoretically, this ability could kill even someone as strong as Madara, as you would just simply put them under the influence of Izanami. And then while they're trapped in that loop, you just walk up to their frozen body and, you know, kill them! But we never saw anyone actually do that, so maybe it's not possible. But man, if you put someone under an infinite loop and they're just sitting there, why wouldn't you kill them? But these 2 broken abilities plus everything we mentioned previously are the reason that the Sharingan is such an overpowered ability that not many other Kekkei Genkai can even come close to. Even something like Wood Release would have a tough time against a competent Sharingan user, demonstrated by the rivalry between Hashirama and Madara. But at the end of the day, I'd still argue that the Sharingan is the superior ability in the grand scheme of what it could possibly do. However, if Izanami and Izanagi didn't exist, I would have placed Wood Release above this one. Although because those 2 outrageous abilities do exist, I simply cannot ignore how powerful the Sharingan truly is, and it well deserves its spot at number 3. Number 2. The Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan. I imagine some of you were thinking I may have spent a little too much time on the regular Mangekyo Sharingan considering it's only an honorable mention. But part of the reason I went pretty in-depth with my opinion on it was because I wanted to show you my issues with it in general, before I talked about its far superior counterpart later in the list, which is of course the regular Sharingan, and now, the Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan. Now since we've already gone over the regular Sharingan and the regular Mangekyo Sharingan, it's no surprise that the Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan retains all of those abilities, so there's no need to mention my opinions on them again as you already know what I think, but just know that they do pertain to this Kekkei Genkai as well. But even so, after taking a thick dookie on the regular Mangekyo Sharingan by keeping it off the list entirely, why in the world am I willing to place the Eternal version at number 2 on the list? Well, believe it or not, the reasoning is actually pretty simple. Basically, every problem I had with the regular Mangekyo Sharingan is thrown out the window. The only remaining issue I have with it is the sheer amount of things you need to do to achieve these eyes in the first place. First, there's everything you need to do for the regular Sharingan and the regular Mangekyo Sharingan, but then after that, you need to find a close family member like a parent or sibling who also has the Mangekyo Sharingan, and take their eyes out of their skull and transplant them into your own eye sockets. After this, you will gain the Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, which grants you everything from before, but also grants you the previous owner's Mangekyo abilities in addition to your own. It also takes away the extreme chakra cost of using Mangekyo abilities, and above all else, takes away the drawback of going blind. So basically everything I detested in the beginning is just gone, except for the steps you need to take to achieve these eyes in the first place, which to be fair, is extremely steep. And realistically, I should knock it back a few points on the list just for that, but the payoff is just so worth it. These eyes are just so powerful that it's impossible not to rank them this high. Everything we talked about before, plus all that extra stuff. Holy hell, dude. I could go in depth with everything again, but if you've listened to everything I said previously, and if you've just seen Naruto in general, you should know exactly what I'm talking about when I say these eyes are next level broken. But even though this Kekkei Genkai is basically unrivaled, there is still one Kekkei Genkai that I believe is better. Now, the moment that you've all been waiting for, number 1, the Rena GaN. I'm sure many of you saw this one coming from the beginning, as the Rena GaN is basically just the Sharingan 4.0. To get one of these bad boys, you need to either receive Hagoromo's chakra or mix the chakra of his sons, Indra and Asura. From what we've seen, you also need to have the Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan already to awaken them, as both Madara and Sasuke, who awakened them through their intended method, had the Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan when they did so. But I could be wrong about this as a requirement. It's more or less just something I noticed. Before we get into why this thing is completely god tier, I just wanted to offer a possibility. So because the Rena GaN is upgraded through the Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, does that mean it retains the special Mangekyo abilities like Amaterasu, for instance? Because I did a lot of scouring the internet and rereading segments of the manga to try and find the answer, and I just couldn't. Because with Madara, when he had both Rena GaN, he didn't demonstrate any Mangekyo specific abilities, and instead he just did a bunch of crazy Rena GaN / Reni Sharingan stuff. And with Sasuke, because he has one Rena GaN and one Eternal Mangekyo, he still has access to Mangekyo abilities in his right eye. And when he uses them, I can't really tell if he can use them through the Rena GaN as well. I would assume that the Rena GaN would still be able to use the previous Mangekyo abilities, at least if the eyes are still in their natural owner's head, but I just couldn't find confirmation if this was actually a thing. So feel free to let me know the answer in the comments if you actually know the truth, because if it was shown or mentioned in the manga, I just happened to miss it or misremember. Anyway, putting the Mangekyo abilities aside for obvious reasons, when it comes to just straight up Rena GaN abilities, this Kekkei Genkai is by far the best. First off, it allows the user to master all 5 chakra natures, and therefore perform any non-Kekkei Genkai jutsu with virtually no chakra cost. Next, it allows them to create black chakra receivers to transmit chakra to various locations or to control other bodies. Then we have what is known as the 6 paths of pain, which I'm sure you're familiar with by now. But essentially, the 6 abilities it grants are basically modern weapons, which is bad news for even the most experienced ninja. The ability to control attractive and repulsive forces, which was capable of basically nuking an entire village. Soul extraction, which will kill anybody and also inform him of their memories. Chakra absorption, which can just straight up suck away any concentrated chakra jutsu like the Rasengan, for instance. So if you use a straight up chakra attack, it's not even gonna end up touching them. It can summon a bunch of scary demonic animals that can do some crazy stuff. And finally, it can summon and control the King of Hell, which already sounds terrifying. But basically, this thing is a life or death lie detector that can also completely restore bodies from any injuries or fatigue by gulping them down for a hot minute, basically allowing infinite heals. On top of all these terrifying abilities, the outer path also allows the user to bring people back to life, so death isn't even a problem anymore. And if that's not enough, we've also got the summoning of the demonic statue of the Outer Path and the ability to bind tailed beasts. So there's really almost nothing a Rena GaN user cannot do. Then when it comes to Madara and Sasuke specifically, they also each have a unique ability. Madara can create basically shadow copies of himself in a completely different plane of limbo, or existence for that matter, while Sasuke can switch places with anything in his near vicinity instantly, making it appear like teleportation, or instant transmission, or shambles. So just by knowing all of those abilities, do I even need to explain why exactly the Rena GaN is the best Kekkei Genkai? Because it kind of explains itself. But by itself, I'd say it's obviously the best, based on the insane amount of powerful and useful abilities. But if we were to add on the addition of all the Sharingan abilities, since it's derived from the Sharingan after all, it just makes it seem that much more powerful, doesn't it? In addition to that, if the ninja in question used Izanagi or Izanami in the past and lost their eyesight, well, lucky you, buckaroo. If they awake the Rena GaN, their eyesight will return as if nothing happened. So something that was supposed to be a punishment for playing God just gets thrown out the window when you become even closer to a god with the Rena GaN's power. So bottom line, compared to the other Kekkei Genkai, they just cannot compete against the Rena GaN, which is why the Rena GaN is my #1 pick for the best Kekkei Genkai in the series. But there you have it, everybody, the top 10 best Kekkei Genkai in Naruto. Hopefully you agreed with my list, or at the very least understood where I'm coming from. If you disagreed with any points, be sure to let me know why in the comments below, along with letting me know what your top 10 would be and why. Be sure to subscribe for the next Naruto top 10, which on that note, I do know which topic I'm going to do next, but I'm keeping it a secret for now, so you'll just have to take my word on the fact that it'll be pretty cool. Be sure to drop the fattest like you possibly can, because the more likes this video gets, the faster that top 10 will come out. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at 2SpookyTube to keep up with the channel and upcoming videos. And if you want to be festive, warm, and celebrate the holiday in style, we'll be sure to snag one of these limited time Christmas sweaters, as they will only be available until January 1st, which is coming up pretty soon, guys, so don't sleep on it. And on January 1st, they will be gone for good. You can find some links to those in the description, and with that, lads, if you cannot get enough Too Spooky content, well, click here for the previous top 10 about the strongest quirks in My Hero Academia, or click here for 10 facts about Orochimaru, or if you want to learn more about Kekkei Genkai but ignored my suggestion at the beginning of the video, well, click here to learn about every single Kekkei Genkai in the series. Thanks for watching, boys, and I'll see you all next year.